There are a whole lot of video games out there, and it's hard to keep up with them all. With so many developers and publishers fighting for a fraction of the gaming market's attention, sometimes impressive and worthwhile gaming experiences slip through the cracks. Colony Wars is one of those games that is considered by many as a hidden gem of the original PlayStation, in spite of what sales reports would argue. Released in late 1997, Colony Wars was developed by Psygnosis, a studio that has unfortunately stopped developing games as of 2012, but at one point boasted some incredibly popular and culturally significant hits in the history of gaming. These credits include the 1991 puzzle game Lemmings, the critically acclaimed racing series Wipeout, and several other substantial hits on both the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. Despite the niche audience of a combat flight sim, Colony Wars received exceptional praise at release. In fact, it managed to hold a 91 and 92% score on both popular review aggregate sites, Metacritic and GameRankings respectively. Many critics considered the visual effects to be some of the greatest offered of any game on the PlayStation up until this point, and it's clear to see why. For a more direct comparison to what outer space looked like in other popular games, Star Fox 64 was released on the Nintendo 64 just a few months before Colony Wars found its way onto Sony's hardware. Hardware that was less graphically powerful than Nintendo's new competitor, mind you. I imagine if I had owned this game as a kid, I would have sunk several dozen hours into just playing this game for the fun of it, as well as trying to see different endings or complete a perfect run. It's one of those games that's just fun to play regardless of your attention to the plot or even your degree of success. You may even decide this old game is worth your time as well, as we discover what's so great about Colony Wars. In Colony Wars, players assume the role of a starship combat pilot fighting for the League of Free Worlds against the colonial navy of the oppressive Earth Empire. Plot-wise, it feels like a Star Wars tie-in game that never got access to the rights and then just swapped out all of the names. But honestly, there are only so many ways you can make space embargo stories interesting. This isn't to say that Colony Wars is a knockoff or anything of the sort, as the developers actually included an excessive amount of original world building for a flight sim action game. The biggest instance of this, outside of the well-structured branching plot opportunities, would be the system database, which allows players to view all kinds of optional information about the game's universe. If they're curious enough, players can learn general, historical, or military data regarding each solar system, as well as the individual planets, moons, and their importance in the game's namesake wars, and the history of the Colony Wars universe. It almost feels out of place due to the purely massive amount of content within these data entries, but for any sci-fi fans out there, it's basically a goldmine of flavor text and world building. The portrayal of outer space itself is the best I can remember seeing on similar hardware, even in comparison to plenty of popular Star Wars games for years to come. There are plenty of minor variances in the distant skybox, rather than a flat black texture with dots. Minor hues of color suggest the existence of far-off galaxies, not to mention the impressive portrayal of various celestial bodies in relative proximity to you. Aside from the stars in the distance, there are also star-like particles in your immediate vicinity, which help portray your speed and direction even without large objects to orient yourself by. No matter how far away you are, you can still find enemy aircraft without any obtrusive heads-up display notifications. Distant spacecraft, no matter whether they're friendly, hostile, military, civilian, or any other nature, will have various blinking lights, much like real-world aircraft or satellites in the night sky. This system of tracking, while not hogging too much of the hardware's capabilities, allowed players to either pinpoint distant targets if needed, or ignore these subtle cues while they focused on an objective immediately in front of them. The combat itself feels very basic, as every fight simply comes down to destroying your enemy's shields first before lighting them up with more ballistic weaponry. But the excitement comes from the bobbing and weaving between hazards to the best of your ability, while chasing targets or defending a helpless ally unit. The sensation of watching missiles and plasma bolts flying by you in battle conveys the same grand sense of outer space combat that audiences could see in Star Wars media. However, not even many Star Wars games had flight controls nearly as smooth as Colony Wars until several years later. You can play the game in 3 perspectives: first person, third person, or from the nose of the spacecraft. This is a simple yet effective way of accommodating as many players as possible, as flight sims and air combat games are one of the oldest genres in gaming's history, and therefore have had a lot of different means of control, especially in the jump to 3D gaming. Concerning the control of the spaceship, somehow the developers managed to find the perfect mixture of precise, responsive controls in juxtaposition to the floaty experience of space's lack of gravity. If the player does need a little time to get their bearings before attempting the main quest, there are training missions just as there were in Star Fox 64. These lessons begin with focus on movement in outer space before involving combat mechanics. The controls become so comfortable after a few play sessions that I forgot I was using analog controls, as this game was released before Sony had even started producing controllers with joysticks. Part of the ease of gameplay is produced by the minimap, which is nothing short of brilliant. In almost any other game or genre, it would have seemed overly complicated or even unfinished, but in the cockpit of a combative spaceship, this digital gyroscope design provides an excellent point of view for how you're moving in relation to the open space around you. Each short mission in Colony Wars is preempted by a briefing on your objectives and targets, as well as a description of which craft you'll be piloting. Your primary weapon can always alternate between anti-shield lasers to take out defenses and standard lasers to deal damage. However, each unique craft has their own special weapons, which could be anything from plasma torpedoes to stun missiles. The briefings themselves build a believable world and situation. Like Metal Gear Solid, Colony Wars doesn't dumb down its themes and ideas, and respects the intelligence of anyone who's willing to show this much interest in their game as to actually follow along. Fun fact, your commanding officer during briefings was voiced by the late William Dufris, who also voiced the titular character of the long-running American children's cartoon, Bob the Builder. Anyway, at the end of each briefing, you're told what's immediately at stake. Sometimes you can tell which missions are likely to dramatically shift the war efforts in favor of this skirmish's victor. This is because the real kicker in the gameplay of Colony Wars is the fact that the outcome of each mission impacts the flow of the story. For example, if you fail a mission, you don't usually get a chance to retry it. Instead, your mission is considered a loss and you have to move on as your commander issues a new order to deal with whatever new circumstances your side of the war has been pushed into. If you fail too many, or the specifically important missions in the grand scheme of the story, then you'll fail the game altogether and have to try a run with more successful missions. At the end of each playthrough, your unique path is shown, so players can reference each level and determine where they could have performed better, changed the story in their favor, or simply experienced a different outcome. Experiencing a unique piece of the story each time you perform differently actually gives this game a roguelike sensation well before that genre was popularized, and provides a surprising amount of replayability despite the one-note tune of the game's actual combat. Since there's no guarantee that your whole campaign won't suddenly end if you fail, every mission feels as important as any other, and they could in fact be a bigger turning point than you even realize. Rather than boss fights, the ceiling for each player's skill level is measured by achieving quote-unquote better endings until they're finally able to succeed in the League of Free Worlds' ultimate goal. As difficult as it may be to achieve, it is exciting to finally see a new cutscene once you complete a mission you've never successfully managed before. Odds were stacked against the popularity of Colony Wars at release, due to hitting store shelves within the same month that Tomb Raider 2, Crash Bandicoot 2, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night were all released on PlayStation. It may not have had record-breaking sales, but this game feels like it would appeal to so many audiences who gave it a shot. Fans of action, racing, flight sims, and adventure games would all have significant amounts of content to enjoy no matter what pulled them into this game at first. It would be fun to see the whole Colony Wars trilogy remastered on modern hardware, but based on the fact that the license hasn't been touched in over 20 years and the members of the Psygnosis development team are scattered throughout the game dev ecosystem, it's hard to imagine that concept of a revival is at the forefront of many people's minds. Incidentally, several key ex-Psygnosis members now work at Firesprite Studios, a relatively new Sony subsidiary that is already working on substantial projects such as the crowdfunded space combat game Star Citizen, as well as a virtual reality game in the Horizon universe alongside Guerrilla Games. As for another fun Where Are They Now, the creator and head writer of Colony Wars, Mike Ellis, was also the design director for Halo 4 at 343 Studios, before rejoining Sony under Santa Monica Studios. All of this to say, we've seen more obscure titles be brought back from the dead, so maybe Colony Wars still has a future if enough paths overlap again. Whether it ever is remastered or you have a way to play the original PlayStation release, Colony Wars is an outstanding experience that makes a usually very serious and heady genre feel much more fun and approachable, while still being exciting. In a time when nearly every video game felt like it had a draw distance of one building at a time, Psygnosis managed to present the vastness and freedom of outer space in a game that rewards players for their own growth without taking away anything from the experience of those who struggle on the way. That is what's so great about Colony Wars. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we briefly experienced the quality of Colony Wars. Want to see some bonus content? Maybe support the creation of these videos? If so, check out the What's So Great Discord, Twitch, or Patreon. Links for all of those are in the description. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Metroid Dread, on screen or in the description. And please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.